All right. Hello. Okay. Show of hands, who here thinks they overthink? Don't overthink it. Wait, that was so quick. That was great. You missed my joke. I had a setup and everything. Okay. All right. We'll keep going. So I was going to raise my hand too and say, me too. And this red bit is going to be just about that. So I came to this topic after some self-reflection that was prompted by Joe's talk at Pepperpalooza about the health of your brain and body and ultimately your mind. I'd realized I had started to overthink a lot of little inconsequential things in my life, which at the end of the day left me feeling mentally drained and physically drained. So I set out to deep dive into this topic of overthinking. Sometimes overthinking feels like this, or maybe this. And even this. But whatever it feels like to you, we all do it, and most of the time, it's relatively harmless. We churn over what we should have done, or overplan about what we should do, and then we move on. It's annoying, but most of the time, it's no more stressful than an annoying song you can't get out of your head. So, there's some pros and cons to overthinking, but let's focus on the positive first. Overthinking has been scientifically linked to highly creative problem solvers. It worked, that's good. According to a recent study out of King's College from a British psychologist, Adam Perkins, it states that they've made a connection between overthinking and creativity. It hypothesizes that the prefrontal cortex, like the front part of your brain, which is responsible for complex cognitive behavior, personality expression, and decision-making, is highly active in the brain of overthinkers. Our brains have a particularly persistent default mode network. The default mode network, which is the circuit in the brain that becomes activated when people are doing nothing in particular, like daydreaming or letting their mind wander. It's also active when the active is when you're thinking about others, thinking about yourself, remembering the past, and planning for the future. So overthinkers actually have trouble turning off this thought-generating network in your brain, and it kind of makes us more prone to dwelling and mulling over our problems, real or imagined. So this ability is also associated with something that we're all familiar with, imagination. Because of the prefrontal cortex, we are able to form new ideas and images of concepts of external objects not present in our senses. Overthinkers have a very vivid imagination, and it can actually spill into our dreams. And you guys know how much I like talking about my dreams. We're able to visualize multiple solutions to any problem. We tend to dwell on problems longer than the average person, and we dig deep, analyze, maybe overanalyze, in order to come up with many possible solutions. Pretty cool. But there's a fine line to walk with overthinking. When the thinking doesn't stop, it causes even more distress, and this is kind of what I was stuck in this past winter. According to psychologist Jeffrey Gray, overthinkers have an unusually high, overactive amygdala, which gives us a tendency to switch to panic and stress sooner than the average person. So this compulsive tendency to overthink has a name in the world of mental health. It's called rumination. To ruminate means to chew over, and the act of rumination means to brood over upsetting thoughts by replaying them in our mind. While many problems are resolved by giving them careful thought and deliberation, the positive side of overthinking, rumination is repetitive thinking, going over and over the same thought or problem without any solution. A problem doesn't get solved, it intensifies by ruminating on it. It is simply repeating typically negative thoughts without mentally moving to a new perspective. Rumination does not lead to new insights or understanding. It just spins us around like we're trapped in an emotionally distressing hamster wheel. And you don't typically overthink the good things. It tends to be about the bad stuff. It isn't when you replay an excellent client presentation or a well-timed joke, even though mine failed at the beginning. It's going through the negatives. Ruminative thoughts, by definition, are intrusive. They pop into our minds unbidden, and they tend to linger, especially when the thought is about something upsetting or distressing. And it impacts our bodies. Replaying distressing thoughts is like picking at emotional scabs because it brings up the distress each time we have that thought and floods our body with stress hormones as a result. It's surprisingly easy to spend hours, even days, stewing in upsetting thoughts, and by doing so, putting ourselves in a state of physical stress and emotional distress. As a result, habitual rumination significantly increases our risk in developing depression, impaired problem solving, eating disorders, substance abuse, and even cardiovascular disease. And it's not great for our brains. Repeating the rumination cycle changes our brain activity, circuitry. Rumination actually changes the structure of our brain, so it gets easier to fall into that same pattern of overthinking over and over and over again. And it becomes a routine. Rumination is a habit of thought. It becomes a challenge to shift to another one. A person who believes, if I just think about it long enough, I will figure it out, is making a mistake. The more habitual the thought, the harder it is to break. But there are things that we can do to stop the cycle, and some of the tips I'm about to explain I found really helpful. Awareness always helps. Your first step is to identify those thoughts and flag them as harmful. Once a ruminative thought becomes repetitive, we need to catch it and convert it into a useful problem-solving task by posing it as a problem that can be answered as opposed to one that cannot be. So for example, convert, I can't believe this happened, to what can I do to prevent it from happening again? Second, the way to erase the trace of a repetitive thought, often a worry, is to block it from the beginning and deliberately plan ahead about what to think instead. It sounds straightforward, but it is one of those things that is easy to understand and hard to do. Third, distract yourself. Redirect your attention to something else that requires focus. A 2 to 3 minute distraction, such as a puzzle, a memory task, anything that requires concentration, can be enough to break the compelling pull of a ruminative thought. If we use distraction each time we have the thought, the frequency with which it appears in our mind will diminish and its intensity will decrease. Journal. Try to get the thoughts out of your head by putting them on paper, and you can break that cycle that they're going over and over. And last, remind your brain who's in charge. Interrupt those unneeded thoughts whenever they come up and plan ahead for a positive thought to switch to. If you need to interrupt and replace a thought 100 times a day, it'll stop fast, probably within that day, even if the switch is as simple as returning your attention to the task at hand. So, at the end of the day, the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another.